Okay, welcome back. This is a special section. It's not really in the book, talking about backup strategies. And you might think, well, this is more to do with implementation than IT security and risk management. But there's an awful lot of choices in here which could either enhance or detract from your ability to do business continuity. So I'm going to go through this. So how important are the servers in your organization, and what would happen if your email server died? Could you do business? A lot of companies, the answer is no. If the web server died, could you do business? No. And in my world, my previous world, we had a file server, and people basically kept all the important documents on the file server because the file server was being backed up and individual PCs were not. So we always encourage people, if it's important, don't leave it on your machine, copy it up to the server. Well, the file server died, and it died bad. I mean, smoked. So we had one team trying to resurrect the server, swapping parts out, maybe, power supplies, trying to get it back up and running. And while we're doing that, we went and grabbed the old server from the warehouse, brought it in, set it on the floor, and started loading the backup tapes. Now, while this is happening, the phone is ringing off the hook. People are banging on the server room door. When's the server gonna be back up? I've got work to do. Non-stop parade of people showing their dissatisfaction that the server was not available. Yeah, and it literally got so bad, I am not making this up, I had somebody stand outside their door and say, "Go away, leave us alone." Yeah. Now, okay, I will confess, the boss came by and we said, "Okay, look, here's the problem and here's how long it's going to take to fix." And, then he left. But yeah, people are very, very vocal when the stuff they expect to work don't work. Just to give you a bizarre coincidence here. Let's say, for example, that you had an awful lot of stored emails and they were clogging up the server. So we tell people, create a local PST file and dump it. But again, if it's important to you, put it on the server. All right. It just so happens that Microsoft Outlook, if the one of the PSTs is not available, it won't even come up. Microsoft Outlook would fail and just say, "Sorry, I don't see your PST, I'm going to close." Rather than saying, "I don't see your PST, but let's go ahead and go to the server and get your new email." So yeah, it was bad. I mean, really bad when the file server died. Okay, so we're going to go through some strategy here, some philosophies, and how you can go about doing this. So first, let's talk about, the actual, backup media. If you're using tape drive, there's really only one answer now, and that's the linear tape out. Probably not what LTL stand for. And so basically, there's different size an LTO 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, all dealing with capacity. Now, I will tell you, the tape drives themselves are a couple $1,000s, and the tapes are kind of sort of expensive, and they always lie. I put that in quotation mark about the capacity because they just assumed that what you're backing up is text and can be compressed. So they'll say, 10 terabyte tape, and then the fine print it says 5 terabyte if compressed. Like all my stuff is already being generated by a tape backup software, which is already doing the compression, so I can't use those. But the tape drives and the tapes themselves are rather expensive. On the other hand, removable drives, if you were to just take a regular old, USB based, flash drive and pop it in and do that, those are relatively cheap, and you can get a couple terabytes without too much trouble. Now, I will tell you the good thing about the tape drive is you can buy a robotic tape system. The arm comes out, pulls the tape out, and sticks it in the drive, and so you could have an entire tape volume that a single backup could span multiple tapes, and hands off. Well, you can't do that with removable drives. I mean, if you're going to use removable drives, you're probably going to have to just pop them out one at a time by hand. And then, of course, there's network attached storage and storage area networks. There's some advantages and some disadvantages of having always connected. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you could do, online cloud kind of things like OneDrive. For example, Microsoft now pesters the heck out of you saying, you open up an Excel spreadsheet. Hey, don't you want to copy this to backup as OneDrive? And it's like, no, thank you. Okay, so choices. Tapes are probably prevalent if you have large amounts of data. If you have if you only have 4 servers and they're, I don't know, 10 terabytes apiece, well, I'd probably just use removable drives. Okay, so media consideration. So where do you store the media? Hopefully, you're not storing it in the server room. That would be really dang convenient. But if the server room caught on fire, you'd lose both the servers and the backup tape. So you've got to have it in a secure facility. In my world, we had a building that was, I don't know, a couple hundred yards away, walking distance. And they had basically a bank vault, a fireproof bank vault. And that's where we stored our tapes. Now you can buy these things, a data vault. And by the way, data vault is another term for that. So if you just typed in Google data vault, you're talking about vaulting services that are provided, not physical buildings. But yes, you can buy these concrete buildings. They're designed to be bulletproof and stormproof. They come out on a trailer, they set it on the ground out in the parking lot, and that becomes your secure storage facility. We've used several of those in the past. So what's the problem with having an always connected? Like I have constant replication. I'm working on a file, and as soon as I hit save, it replicates it back up to keeps it where it is, but makes a copy of it someplace else. Well, ransomware tools, the ones that go in and encrypt your files, can follow that link to the network resource. So if you have it always connected, it's the same thing with at home if you had OneDrive, okay? So you get infected with malware. It happens to be ransomware, and it encrypts the files on your C drive, notices that there's an active connection to OneDrive, and does the same thing up there. So, wow, that is not a good idea. So having always connected is incredibly easy. It's convenient. There's a lot of advantages to it, particularly if the user themselves can go and grab the latest version. That would be fantastic, but I'm sorry. Ransomware just kind of makes that a really tough choice. So which of these choices require specialized hardware? I mean, if I was going to buy a replacement server, okay, so my server I have now is getting kind of old, and I need more. And so, I go get some rack mount system, and it's going to have, the SAS drive or the SCSI drive or whatever technology you're using to get to the tape backup, right? The tape backup system. Or it's going to be embedded in the machine. If it's like a U3 or bigger rack mount, you could actually probably have a tape drive, 5.25 inch, 5.5 inch drive bay strictly on the machine itself. That would work. But the point here is, when you buy a replacement server, you're probably going to have to match the technology you had before. And, technology obsolescence, if you had an LTO2 drive before, you're probably not going to put an LTO2 drive in the new one. Hopefully everything is backwards compatible, but you see what I'm getting at is that if there's specialized hardware, now if you're just using removable media, you probably don't have any issues whatsoever, because you could be using USB or SAS or, whatever it's using. Okay, let's continue. So backup types. So one of the ways you can do is you can do what's called an image backup, which basically just clones the disk. Now, it was originally intended to do physical drives. So in other words, we're not talking about a RAID or NAS or SAN. I mean, you can use it on those scenarios. Don't get me wrong. It'll work. In fact, it doesn't complain at all. But it was originally intended for physical disks because it would go in and grab the partition information off the disk, and allow you to take replace that hardware and do a restore, and it would automatically put the partitions back. Well, it can't put the partitions back for RAID or NAS or SAN because that partitioning is done elsewhere. I use Acronis. That's the brand that I use, so I'm not plugging them. A cheap version is called Clonezilla. It's free. I've used it once or twice. I hear that people really love it, so great. It's free and it does great image backups. Now, image backups, typically you don't have a choice. You basically say, this partitioned on this hard drive, copy it. And it goes, okay, boss, and just goes off and does it. You could tell it, well, okay, it's an image backup, but let's just skip the files that we don't need, like the recycle bin and some other things. Okay, so you do have a few choices when you're doing an image backup. Now, most backup software will also allow you to do file-based backup. And this is just like having a duplicate copy of a file someplace. And this really works well for, the RAID and the NAS and the SAN kind of a thing. Because it doesn't really care about how it's partitioned or how it's formatted, if it's, an NTFS drive or if it's, over the wire through a Microsoft share. It doesn't care, how it got there, because it's just going to use the file open kind of things and copies it across. So it's typically slower, but a little bit more complex. But again, it works just fine. And then the third one is that live connection. So I have continuous replication. As soon as I save a file, it pops it up. And most of those are cloud-based. I have seen a couple, in fact, we'll talk about it in just a minute, where this would be really handy if you had people who had the ability to go find the previous version. I'm working on this document and I screw it up and I go, oh man, that was dumb. Let me go back in time and grab the old version before I messed it up. That would be cool. And do it without having IT staff involved. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about versioning. So Microsoft has a thing called file history. It used to be, promoted in an awful lot, but not so much now. And Apple's Time Machine, and it's continuous versioning. In the Microsoft world, it had to be from one physical disk to another physical disk, not partition. In other words, you can't have a drive and partition C and D on the same physical drive and then have it do file versioning from C over to D. It'll say, no, we're not doing that. So it has to be remote or in a physical disk. And it will allow you to go back in time, like, show me this file from 2 weeks ago, kind of a thing. Now, the problem is there's not an infinite amount of space. If you allocated another drive, drive Q out there, and say, this is going to be what we're going to use for file versioning. Well, if there's 15 versions of the file, that's going to take up an awful lot of space. And so typically what happens is it is automatic cleanup procedure. Once you've reached the capacity of the drive, it starts deleting the old ones. So it's not good for if I lost my machine completely and I want to get everything back. No, because it's going to start deleting things, okay? So it's not perfect. And then it will not do encrypted file system on Windows. It won't do an encrypted file system file, EFS. It'll just skip those. So is that sufficient for a backup? Is file versioning is okay? No, it's not. Because the continuous versioning doesn't keep everything, because it just flat can't. There's not enough physical space to pull that off. Okay, so bare metal is a term that we use an awful lot. So here's a scenario. I need to replace a server, so it caught on fire and I bought me a new one. So I boot up the new server because maybe it came with an operating system. I install any updates before I connect it to the network, because that's one of the requirements that I have from my IT department is I can't just have an unpatched server out there. So it's got to have, all the patches. It's got to have the antivirus stuff. Then I have to load the backup software, whatever that is. And then after all that, then I'm ready to perform the restore. And the restore is going to copy on top of the operating system that you just installed, which is kind of silly. It's kind of like duplication of work. Now, the other choice is what's called bare metal, which means I use a recovery disk that's provided by the software. And I boot it from the recovery disk, point it to the backup software, and walk away. And it performs the entire thing. It does operating system and everything. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.